Hello everyone. We are Group 5 presenting the broad topic of motherhood and disability. So the team members contributing to the presentation are Ankit Bharadwaj, Ankit Verma, Krishnan Makara, Ananya Sharma, Anshika Gupta, Sai Sudha Samantha and Chitra Thukural. So I will be starting motherhood in Indian context and introduction. So the concept of motherhood is not limited to the notion of a caregiver but also in the context to how we refer to the word motherland to associate our nurturing roots to the country we grew up in. Next slide. Another aspect to address is the ironic position of single mothers and the stigma around it. Despite us associating our patriotism by referring to terminologies as motherland or Bharat Ma, we often ignore the hypocrisy we owe to single mothers as well as working mothers who, for whatever circumstance, chose to go back to their career paths after giving birth. This inadvertently bleeds into the lack of postnatal awareness. These issues will be further highlighted in the presentation.
Hello, my name is Anshika and my path is Motherhood in Indian context. It's an introduction. So it's the second part of introduction. So in India, the experience of motherhood is influenced by profound socio-cultural aspect, particularly when it comes to domain of disability. The Indian perspective of disability, which has its historical roots in folklore, old scriptures, and social behaviors, frequently disproportionately affects women. When disability carries a stigma in many worldwide contexts, in India, it is inextricably related to previous deeds, karma, and most of the time the perceived shortcomings of the mother. The concept of karma is one of the significant ideas in traditional Indian thinking. It is thought that a person's circumstances in this life are determined by their deeds in past life. When a baby is born disabled, it is expected to assume that this is because of past transgression committed by the mother or by the child in a previous life. Mothers are held responsible for events that are entirely not in their control, placing them at the core of the guilt triangle. Another critical factor in the narrative is child's gender. Inherited profound socio-cultural biases arise from a long-standing preference for male kids.
Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about physical disabilities and motherhood. The overlooked aspects of motherhood among women with physical disabilities underscore the prevalent lack of recognition of the sexuality and womanhood and the prevailing message that have discouraged their engagement in reproduction and motherhood. Historical discrimination in pronatalism primarily targeted healthy, fluent white women, leaving women with disabilities alongside marginalized groups like poor women, immigrants, women of color, and lesbians, which were discouraged from embracing motherhood. This bias stemmed from the perception that women with disabilities were childlike, dependent, and asexual, thus excluding them from traditional female roles and reproductive choices. Moreover, people with disabilities confronted challenges in acknowledging their sexuality and establishing intimate relationships. Next slide. Barbara Waxman passionately advocated for disabled women's reproductive rights, challenging the asexual stereotype and the belief that their reproductive capacity posed threats. Reports revealed a range of restrictions on reproductive freedom for women with disabilities, from coerced abortions to pressure for sterilization procedures or subtler discouragement for childbearing. Statistics indicated lower childbearing rates among physically disabled women compared to non disabled peers, accompanied by higher rates of hysterectomy, often recommended as a default for those with severe physical disabilities. Next slide. On the subject of prenatal care, prenatal diagnosis has become routine, with a significant number of women choosing to terminate pregnancies upon detecting conditions like Down syndrome, spina bifida, or cystic fibrosis. Disability rights activists have long urged critical examination of this practice. On the subject of prenatal care, prenatal diagnosis has become routine, with a significant number of women choosing to terminate pregnancies upon detecting conditions like Down syndrome, spina bifida, or cystic fibrosis. Disability rights activists have long urged critical examination of this practice, highlighting the disparity between how people with disabilities perceive their lives and how professionals might describe them. For instance, the equation of disability with tragedy and a life not worth living has been a source of contention. Many individuals with disabilities lead fulfilling, enjoyable lives despite socially created barriers. They express concern that prospective parents may make life altering decisions based on incomplete or overtly negative information about disability, often neglecting to consider the impact of social and attitudinal barriers. Next slide. Disabled mothers, though recently recognized as a distinct group with shared struggles, have diverse experiences. It's not just the type or severity of their disability that shapes their journey, but how it intertwines with other aspects of their identity, like class, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Their unique experiences are further influenced by their individual contexts, support systems, and personality traits. These mothers' stories don't fit into neat categories of hardship or joy. They often blend moments of happiness with candid discussions of barriers, frustrations, and worries. For instance, in Sylvia Dick Gomez's Intervals, a humorous short story, we read about a single mother's joys and tribulations, her teenage stepdaughter choosing to live with her, a young daughter's innocent comment about getting attention due to having a disabled mother in the school, and the mother's admission of moments of frustration, anger, fear, and pain. This narrative challenges conventional ideas about parent-child relationships, showcasing the diversity of acceptance that parenting practices and family dynamics should have.
Hi everyone. So I'll be talking about the abortion paradox and its balance with sex selection. In 1994, under the PNDT Act, India banned sex-based abortions in response to widespread protests. However, despite the law, the 2001 census revealed a decline in female infants, which raised concerns. Strangely, the law allows disability-based selection while prohibiting sex-based choices, creating a contradiction. Understanding why women choose to abort daughters is important. Often it is a protest against societal oppression. Mothers of undesired daughters and disabled children face challenges. Opting for a disabled child challenges traditional views of motherhood, similar to resisting sex-based selection due to patriarchal norms, which deepens prejudices. Opinions on aborting disabled fetuses vary among women. Despite the lack of consensus, favoring abortion for disabled fetuses prevails. Families weigh long-term gains like dowry savings in sex-based selection. Patriarchal norms often add caregiving to women's unpaid labor. In the same vein, disability and the associated burden of perpetual motherhood, based on the mother's social location and other contextual experiences, influence decisions on abortions. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'll be talking about the problems with the medical model. In Parenting India's advice column, we come across advices where a gynecologist encourages to get ultrasound for detecting congenital issues like Down syndrome or anencephaly, stressing on the need for timely intervention to eliminate them. However, this advice lacks insight into the nature of disability, its severity, or the potential of raising a disabled child. It merely suggests termination. Basically, ethical medical professionals should provide comprehensive details, enabling informed decisions instead of cautionary advice that bluntly medicalizes abnormal pregnancies. Also, assuming that prenatal diagnosis can entirely eliminate disability is risky. Only about 2% of births that have disabilities that could occur at various stages after birth. Prenatal testing, considering its risks, should be mainly performed for high-risk pregnancies. While some disabilities may be grounds for abortion, we come across narratives of many individuals who live independently with these conditions when given proper opportunities for their sustenance. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'll be talking about the need to have a stronger social model. The disability debate often focuses on medical aspects, ignoring social barriers like inaccessible buildings and negative attitudes, which pose significant challenges. These societal hurdles, not limited body functions, are the real issue. Lack of elevators, ramps, accessible information coupled with prejudice. Addressing disability requires reshaping society, emphasizing its beyond medical advancements. Capitalist economies label disability as a deficit. marginalizing many due to work-related injuries. Disabled people are disempowered in a profit-oriented system that excludes those needing extra resources to participate fully. They are perceived as financial burdens, offering minimal contributions to society while demanding extensive resources for their support. This problematically justifies the prevention of disabled births in today's profit-oriented world as society bears the cost associated with disabilities. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'll be talking about the idea of free choice, whether it is a myth or a reality. Focusing on individual reproductive choice overlooks a fundamental assumption. Prenatal tests imply selecting against atypical results, raising questions about genuine free choice in eliminating disabled fetuses. Technological advancements like prenatal diagnosis enhance perceived choice but often steer decisions towards socially desirable outcomes. In India, prenatal technology disproportionately affects girls and the disabled, with doctors urging screening and societal pressure on women to make choices in a social framework where disability already carries a negative social stigma. Within this negative social context, assessing genuine choice becomes complex. Opting to raise a disabled child might seem irrational.
My name is Ankit Bharadwaj and I will cover the intersections of motherhood and intellectual disability, or ID. To give a very brief idea about ID, it basically involves problems with general mental abilities that affect functioning in two areas. Number one, intellectual functioning, such as learning, problem solving, judgment. And number two, adaptive functioning, which are activities of daily life such as communication and independent living. Now, to get a coherent understanding of the intersectionality of motherhood and ID, we need to look into two distinct typologies of mothers in this context. Number one, mothers of children with intellectual disability, and number two, mothers with intellectual disability taking care of their children. Number one, mothers of children with intellectual disability. Parents with children with ID can face stigmatization, humiliation, and prejudice due to their children's appearance, behavior, or lack of control over their physiology. This stems from the societal idea of a fully rational, mature human mind, contrasting with the perceived deficiency of individuals with intellectual disabilities. The birth of a child with ID can disrupt not only the parents but also the entire family system, leading to a crisis and high risk of dysfunction or even family breakdown. This situation evokes a sense of tragedy and horror due to the mysterious and inevitable nature of disability, causing emotional and social changes within and outside the family. In this context, it is important to categorize and study the roles played by mothers of children with ID. Number one is negative appraisal. Many mothers expressed initial negative and pessimistic appraisals of their situations upon learning about their child's disability. Some felt that caring for a child with disability was unfair and resigned to a lifetime of caregiving, believing that their child would be completely useless. These mothers also experienced disappointment and grief over their child's limitations. Number two is pragmatic and benefit finding perspective. While a minority, some mothers held a pragmatic view and saw caring for the child as a duty. They emphasized their commitment to working for the child's improvement, even if it required spending money. These mothers considered it their responsibility to do their best for their child. Number three, evolving appraisals. Many mothers described how their initial negative and pessimistic appraisals evolved over time. They went from feeling a lack of confidence and courage to becoming more optimistic and resilient. The concept of coherence emerged, indicating that many mothers began to view their child's disability as meaningful and manageable. However, some mothers still struggle to find meaning and adaptation to various aspects of their child's disability. Appraisal of the cause of disability. It is also highlighted how parents attributed the cause of their child's ID to various factors. While some pointed to medical complications during pregnancy or birth, others framed their child's disability as a result of God's wish or karma. These appraisals were not always based on rational or factual explanations, but had profound meaning for their parents. And lastly, we have stressors and a pile up of demands. Basically, mothers of children with disabilities face numerous stressors, including the emotional impact of the diagnosis, financial strains from giving up jobs and covering therapy costs, and conflicts within families, particularly regarding the child's diagnosis and symptoms. Mothers also grapple with the child's challenging behavior, health issues, and low functioning level. Additionally, reproductive decisions, especially for those with a firstborn with a disability, generate anxiety about potential health and developmental concerns in future children. Next, we have mothers with intellectual disability. Although direct observational research on the actual caregiving of mothers with ID is scant, extant studies have suggested that caregiving by parents with ID is often substandard. For example, mothers with ID have typically been found to be less sensitive to their children's signals and also display less direct interactive behaviors, but also more direct commanding instructions when interacting with their children compared to mothers from the general population. In addition, maternal ID with external but associated risk factors like abuse, trauma, maltreatment, or ATM that they may be facing or have faced during their lives may intensify the deficit care in children. Such parents may struggle with maintaining appropriate boundaries and also may exhibit overly permissive, harsh, or abusive behaviors towards their children. This later can lead to attachment problems in children, including disorganization and insecurity. Attachment, which is the emotional bond between a child and their primary caregiver, plays a crucial role in a child's development, as it promotes their survival by keeping them close to the caregiver. The quality of attachment is influenced by the caregiver's behaviors and is reflected in the child's mental representations of themselves and others.
So now I'll be talking about the psychological and judicial standpoint, and I'll be starting with postpartum depression. Postpartum depression, as it says, is a form of depression where the trigger is childbirth. As seen in this slide, the prevalence and symptoms, baby blues and PPD are similar. Yet what does contribute for PPD to actually be a mental disability? So again, if you focus on the slide, there's the reason why it comes in the disability intersectionality is due to the factor of it being a little hindrance to the mother's mental well-being, and this leads to the difficulties in bonding and in some cases even having the fear and anxiety of holding the baby. PPD, depending on its severity, is suggested to have an intervention both in terms of medicines and therapy. Now we hop on to postpartum psychosis. Now this is a tricky, but it is a very rare and a severe mental disorder that often seems to mimic the same symptoms as other psychosis, such as schizophrenia even. A birth mother suffering from postpartum psychosis often is a threat, not only to herself but to the infant or the child as well. To explain it better, we will look at the case study of Lyndon C. Clancy. Clancy on 25th January 2023 strangled her daughter, son and infant, all aged 5, 3 and 8 months, and then respectively attempted to take her own life. On the recounts of her husband, it is revealed that Clancy was aware that she may be suffering from psychosis, yet due to not having proper help and care on time, went into what can be referred as a manic episode and ended up taking such horrible actions. Yet this doesn't come with a place of malice or hatred toward the child or children. It is simply the inability to differentiate the hallucination and delusions from reality. So over to Christian, who will now be discussing Munchausen's by proxy.
I will be talking about Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy. Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy is a complex and troubling form of child abuse in which a caretaker, often a caretaker or a caregiver, often a parent, exaggerates, fabricates, or induces physical or psychological symptoms in a child. This deceptive behavior is driven by a desire for attention, sympathy, or control. MSBP poses serious risks to the child's physical and emotional well being as well, and understanding this syndrome is crucial for early detection and prevention of harm. The syndrome presents itself in a series of deceptive behaviors from the caregiver related to the child's health and often leading to unnecessary medical tests and hospitalizations. The child appears to be in a state of constant unexplained, and recurrent health issues which even medical professionals struggle to diagnose accurately. The motivation for this syndrome is primarily a pathological need for attention and validation. The caregivers may also have a compulsion to play the role of a perfect parent and a caregiver. Diagnosis for MSBP can be exceedingly difficult because the caregivers are often adept at manipulating the situation to deceive healthcare providers. A multidisciplinary approach is often necessary, involving clinical, medical, and psychological assessments to make a proper diagnosis. Coming to the effects of MSBP on children, the physical consequences. The unnecessary medical procedures and interventions can often lead to physical harm and trauma for the child. Misdiagnosis from the part of healthcare experts may also result in delayed treatment for actual genuine medical conditions that the child may be facing. Emotional and psychological consequences. Children subjected to MSBP are often suffering from severe emotional and psychological distress. Anxiety, depression, and a distorted sense of reality can persist, including trust issues, particularly related to parental figures. This may well, in fact, affect them well into adulthood.
Now I'll be talking about the judicial aspect of PPP and MSBP. Now this happens because of the nature of postpartum psychosis and Munchausen by Proxy itself, and due to their complex nature and them as grey areas in the disability due to the nature they present themselves. To tackle such situations, the judicial aspect is explored in order to see clarity. As you can see in this slide, these factors, the factors mentioned, are the factors often observable in contrary to such cases. These criteria are laid out solely for the purpose to make sure that the caregiver who has jeopardized the life of the child or an infant was actually suffering from such mental disabilities and issues, and not using them as a guise to justify their cruel actions. It is highly observed that in such cases, the attorney representing the accused often pleads into courts in terms of getting their sentences reduced and/or to never serve time for their actions. So basically, they are used as a form of getting away with something. With that being presented, I hereby end my presentation and open the forum for questions. Thank you.